I sat at the kitchen table with my reading glasses still on, watching the candle on my untouched birthday cupcake flicker and die. No call, no message, just a bank alert. $300 withdrawn, David M. My own son, the same one who hadn't, said a word to me today. He forgot my birthday, I whispered, but remembered my PIN. This wasn't the first time, but this time I'd already started hiding something from him, something that would change everything. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. I used to think being a good mother meant being everything all the time. Provider, protector, cheerleader, safe place. I wore the role like a second skin, so tightly I forgot who I was before it. My name is Carol. I'm 62 years old. For most of my life, I was a school librarian. The kind with a sweater over her shoulders, a pencil tucked behind her ear, and tissues in her drawer for the kids who needed a quiet cry between classes. I loved books. I loved children. But most of all, I loved being David's mom. I had him young, 26 and newly widowed. His father, Mark, died in a car accident just 3 months before David was born. I remember sitting in the hospital bed, cradling this red-faced, wailing baby, whispering to him, "It's just you and me now." And that was the promise I kept, for decades. I made his lunches every morning, added little notes with knock-knock jokes and silly drawings. I was at every parent-teacher conference, every soccer game, even when it meant leaving work early or skipping meals. When he got chickenpox, I stayed up for 3 nights straight, checking his temperature every hour. When he had his first heartbreak, at 15, I sat on the floor of his room and held him while he cried, wiping his tears like I did when he was 5. I never remarried, never even really dated. People told me I was too devoted. I thought they were wrong, because in my heart, I believed love given to a child always came back stronger, and for a while it did. David was affectionate, sweet. He'd curl up beside me on the couch, rest his head on my shoulder, and say, "You're my favorite person, Mom." On Mother's Days, he'd make breakfast and read me poems he wrote himself. But somewhere along the way, maybe during college, maybe after, things shifted. It wasn't all at once. It was quiet, slow, like water, wearing down stone. He stopped calling unless he needed something, forgot birthdays here and there, said he was busy. I'd drop off groceries and he'd say thanks, but wouldn't look up from his phone, and each time I swallowed it, told myself he was overwhelmed, told myself, at least he's not in trouble, at least he still talks to me. When he graduated college and couldn't find a job, I was the first to say, "Don't worry, I'll help until you're back on your feet." That help turned into months, then years. When he got scammed trying to start a small business, I gave him my emergency savings. "It's only money," I told him. "You'll bounce back." But he never did, and I never stopped handing over what I had. I even let him link his debit card to my account years ago, just in case. I never imagined he'd still be using it at 31, let alone on my birthday. I think the part that hurts most isn't the money. It's that he didn't even think to check in. No text, no call, no message, just silence. It made me wonder, did I raise a kind son? Or just teach him that love always meant giving, no matter the cost? Because if I'm being honest, I was always the woman who gave. I stayed late at school helping other people's children learn to read, brought home stray cats, sent birthday cards to neighbors who barely knew my name. I told myself I didn't mind. But that birthday morning, staring at that cupcake, I did mind. I minded a lot. I had spent a lifetime showing up for everyone else. But the moment I needed someone to show up for me, I realized I might have disappeared somewhere along the way. The day after my birthday, I woke up early. Not because I had plans, because I couldn't sleep. I kept wondering if maybe he'd call late, maybe he was just distracted, maybe I was overreacting. I turned my phone over. Still nothing. What I did see was a social media notification. I don't even use Instagram much, but curiosity got the better of me. I tapped it open. There he was, David, laughing in a dimly lit bar, holding up a drink with one hand, his other, arm around some friends I didn't recognize. The caption read, "Late night hustle break. Work hard, play harder." I stared at it for a long time, not because I was angry yet. No, I was confused, heartbroken maybe, trying to fit the pieces. Together, he hadn't just forgotten, he was celebrating, and I wasn't even in his rearview mirror. David lived only 25 minutes from me. Same city, same area code. He used to drop by unannounced, just to raid my fridge. Now, visits only happened when his fridge was empty, or when his rent was due. He called me old school for still clipping coupons and baking from scratch. I called him modern. What I didn't say was that I worried about him, about how often he jumped from project to project, startup to startup, always promising. This was the one. He'd started a fitness coaching brand during the pandemic, lasted 3 months. Then it was cryptocurrency. Then website flipping. Then social media influencing. Every time something didn't work out, he said, "The market is trash, not me." And every time he needed more money, I gave it. At first, I told myself it was just temporary, a soft place to land while he figured it out. Then it became a pattern. I'd tried setting boundaries once about 2 years ago. Told him I couldn't cover his rent again after he blew through his paycheck on a business retreat. He didn't speak to me for a week. When he finally did, he said, "It's always when I need you most that you pull away." And that cut me deep, because that's the thing about being needed. It feels a lot like being loved, until you realize it's not. I started noticing the shift in language. "Can I borrow?" Turned into, "Just send it to my account." "Thank you" became, "You got it, right?" Still, I justified it. Told myself, it's hard being young today. Rent is high, life is expensive, he's just stressed. But the birthday made it impossible to ignore, because this wasn't about stress. This was about priority, and the truth is, I wasn't one. Around noon, I walked down the street to my local bakery and bought myself a small chocolate cupcake with lavender icing. The girl behind the counter wrote, "Happy birthday" on the box without asking. Maybe she guessed. Maybe it was the look on my face. I took it home, lit a candle, sat alone at my table and tried to feel something. Gratitude, resilience, pride. All I felt was tired. Later that day, I got another notification. A scheduled withdrawal, $300 from the old auto transfer I set up when he first moved out. Back then, it was so he could buy groceries and pay bills while he transitioned into adulthood. I'd forgotten it was still active. Apparently, he hadn't. No text, no request. He just took it. And that's when I remembered something chilling. Years ago, I'd helped him sign up for a budgeting app. To link his accounts, he had to use mine too, since I was the primary cardholder on his student account. I'd meant to remove it later. I never did. That meant he could see my account balance any time, knew exactly how much I had, what I could afford. He knew. And he still took. Not maliciously, not angrily, casually, like someone who never learned. The weight of the things they were handed. I opened my old checkbook, pulled out every transfer record, every receipt. I'd given him over $14,000 in the last 5 years. $14,000. That could have been new windows for the house. A bathroom renovation, a trip to the coast, or just peace of mind. Instead, it went to bounced ventures, bar tabs, and broken promises. I thought about calling him, asking why, pleading, explaining how much it hurt, but I didn't, because some part of me already knew the answer. I just wasn't ready to hear it out loud. I told myself I was just being a good mother. But now, with every dollar gone, I wondered, was I just being used? That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I confronted David, not with anger, just a small, cautious nudge. A text. "Hey, sweetheart. I missed hearing from you on my birthday. Hope everything's okay." I waited. 30 minutes, then an hour. When my phone finally buzzed, it was a short, chirpy response. "OMG, sorry. Things have been hectic. You know I love you. Hey, BTW, can you spot me another $200 until Friday? Rent's tight again." That was it. No happy birthday. No apology. Not even a question mark. I stared at the message, feeling something in my chest twist. Not sharp, not explosive, just cold. Numb. I didn't respond. Instead, I stood up, went into the living room, and opened the old photo album I hadn't touched in years. There he was, David, 6 years old, grinning with chocolate frosting on his cheeks, holding up a lopsided birthday card he'd made for me in crayon. It read, "To the bestest mommy in the whole universe, I love you 3,000 times." Back then, he couldn't go a day without asking if I was okay. He used to leave sticky notes in my purse. "Don't forget snacks," or "Smile today, Mama." Somewhere along the way, that little boy vanished, and I don't know when it happened. That's the hardest part, not knowing the moment your child stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as a resource. I closed the album and walked to the kitchen, poured myself a cup of tea I didn't want. I opened my laptop and hesitated before logging into the budgeting app. Yes, the one I'd forgotten he still had access to. It showed every transaction tied to our shared history. And there it was, Saturday night. Nightjar Lounge, 97 to 50. Easy Ride, 1820. Crush Pizza, 24.15. Total, 139.85. Almost half the money he pulled from my account that morning. I wanted to believe maybe he was just covering bills. Buying groceries, surviving. But no, he was partying, eating out, living casually while I sat alone, pretending one cupcake made a celebration. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was the casualness of it. The ease. The assumption that I'd be there, no matter what. That he never had to ask. That I didn't need anything in return. Not respect, not gratitude, not even acknowledgement. I felt a shame I couldn't name. Because I'd let it get this far. I enabled it. Even my friends didn't know the whole truth. I'd always defended him, told them he was just finding his way. When they'd raise an eyebrow at the 5th failed business or the borrowed rent money, I'd laugh it off. "He's trying," I'd say. "The world's different now." But in the quiet of my house, there were no justifications left, only silence. And silence is loud when it's heavy with truth. I thought about calling my sister, Jean. She'd been warning me for years, gently, lovingly. "You give too much, Carr," she'd say. "Let him stand on his own." But I didn't want to hear her voice, not yet. Not while I was still trying to believe this was just a phase. Instead, I opened a drawer and pulled out every old bank statement I had. Paper records. I wasn't even sure why I'd kept them. Habit, maybe. I spread them across the table. Highlighted. Every transfer, every debit tied to David. It was like laying out the bones of a quiet betrayal. There were entries from holidays, weekends, even on the anniversary of Mark's death. He never asked what those days meant to me. Never remembered. The emotional math didn't add up anymore. How had I raised a son who could smile into a camera with a cocktail in hand, while his mother sat alone, her birthday unspoken, her savings quietly siphoned? I stared at the numbers so long my eyes ached. And still, I didn't cry. Not yet. I just sat there, tracing the ink of each transaction, each reminder of how far love can stretch before it breaks. The next morning, I folded every statement neatly into a manila envelope. I wasn't sure what I'd do with them yet, but I knew this. Pretending it didn't matter was no longer an option. I stood in the middle of the living room, holding the envelope of statements like it might bite. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of finally seeing everything all at once. Years of my life, reduced to line items and dollar signs. A sudden gust of wind rattled the window pane, and just like that, I was back in his room. 15 years ago, standing in the doorway while teenage David hurled his textbook across the floor. "You never trust me," he'd screamed. All I had said was no to buying him a new gaming console. I remember the look on his face, not sadness, not disappointment. It was fury, like a king denied tribute. He was 16, and I was still paying off credit cards from the last Christmas. I apologized. I apologized. Even as I bent down to pick up the shattered pieces of plastic, I said, "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I just need a little more time." That was the beginning. The start of me confusing love with appeasement. It's easy, you know. Easy to make excuses. When you love someone more than you love boundaries. I gave him my time, my energy, my savings, and when that wasn't enough, I gave him pieces of myself I didn't know I was allowed to keep. I thought I was doing the right thing. Thought I was giving him freedom, security, trust. But what I really gave him was permission. I sat on the edge of the couch, the same place I had nursed him through chickenpox, bad grades, broken hearts, and for the first time in my life, I couldn't find a way to comfort myself. My chest felt heavy, my ears rang. I tried to breathe slow, but the air caught in my throat like smoke. That's when the tears came. Not loud, dramatic sobs, just quiet streams running down my face, like they'd been waiting, politely, for permission. In my lap was the birthday card I had bought myself. A silly thing. Light blue, with a cartoon teacup on the front and the words, "Wishing you peace, joy, and sweet moments just for you." I had planned to laugh at it, maybe light a candle and make a wish. Instead, I sat there, 32 years after becoming a mother, wondering if I had failed. Not because I didn't love enough, but because maybe I loved too much. I thought of all the times I'd lied for him, covered up missed rent payments, paid his phone bill without telling anyone, sent him gift cards under fake names so he wouldn't feel ashamed. Ashamed? He didn't even feel guilty. I felt the shame. I carried it like a purse, tucked neatly under my arm, ready to be opened when people asked why he hadn't called, or why he wasn't working, or why he was always in between opportunities. I told myself he was still figuring things out, but he was no longer a boy. He was 31, and I was tired, not the kind of tired that a nap fixes, the kind that settles in your bones, in the back of your neck, in the pit of your stomach. I stood up, reached for the bookshelf, and pulled out my old journal. The leather cover was cracked, the pages yellowing. I flipped to the last entry, 2 years ago. A therapist I'd seen briefly had suggested journaling. I'd only gone to 3 sessions before David made me feel guilty for wasting money on talking about feelings. But I remember something she said. She looked at me, not unkindly, and asked, "Would you let a stranger treat you the way your son does?" I hadn't known how to answer, but tonight, I finally did. I opened the journal to a fresh page and wrote, "No, I wouldn't, not anymore." Then I wrote every moment I could remember, every time he took without asking, every holiday he skipped, every time he said, "You're being dramatic," or "Don't make this about you." By the time I finished, 2 hours had passed. The envelope of statements sat beside me. But now it felt different. Not like shame, like evidence, not for a courtroom. For me. Proof that what I felt wasn't imaginary, that I hadn't invented this ache. Engagement prompt 2. Have you ever had to set boundaries with someone you love? Deeply? I'd really like to hear your story in the comments. I stood, walked to the mirror, and stared at myself. I looked older, not just in age, but in spirit. My eyes, once quick to soften, now held a kind of stillness, and I said it out loud, steady and clear. This ends now. I had always made space for him, but for the first time, I was ready to make space for myself. The next morning, I woke before the sun. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that usually made me feel lonely, but not today. Today it felt like permission. I poured my coffee slowly, letting the smell wrap around me like a blanket. Then I walked straight to my desk and picked up the phone. First call, the bank. I asked to speak with someone in account security. The woman on the line was polite, but hesitant when I explained the situation. "Your son still has authorized access," she said. "Technically, he didn't do anything illegal." I took a breath and nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "That's fine. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to end it." We closed the old joint account, transferred everything into a new one under my name only. I changed passwords, removed his cards, and asked for fraud alerts to be added in case he tried to use the old numbers. I expected to feel guilty. Instead, I felt lighter. Second call, my credit union. Same process. Third call, my financial advisor, Richard, who I hadn't spoken to since Mark passed. I asked him to help me set up a new savings plan. Something with guardrails, something for me. By noon, I had taken back every inch of financial access I'd once given David. And it felt strange, not triumphant, not sad, just new. Later that day, I went to the local park, the same one David used to run through as a little boy, chasing squirrels and throwing bread to the ducks. I sat on a bench and watched a young mother push her toddler on the swing. The child shrieked with laughter, shouting, "Higher, Mommy, higher!" I smiled, but there was a pang in my chest. That used to be us. We were happy once. Real, uncomplicated, everything, ahead of us happy. But things change. People grow, or sometimes they don't. That evening, I journaled again. I wrote down what I'd done that day, not just the logistics, but the emotions, pride, relief, a small flicker of peace. Until the phone rang. It was David. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a message came through. "Hey, my rent transfer." Bounced. "What's going on? Did something happen to your account?" "No. How are you?" No mention of my birthday. Just confusion. Why his usual source had dried up. For a moment, I felt a familiar tug. That old reflex. Explain, justify, make. It easy for him, but I didn't. Instead, I texted back, "Hi David, I've made some changes. I'm not in a place to provide financial support right now. I hope you're able to work things out." He responded 5 minutes later. "Wow. Okay. So you're just gonna cut me off after everything?" I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed, slowly, deliberately, "I'm not cutting you off. I'm setting a boundary. There's a difference." I hit send. Then I turned off my phone. That night, I sat on the back porch with a blanket around my shoulders and a cup of mint tea in hand. The stars were soft and scattered. The air smelled like jasmine and damp soil. For the first time in years, I didn't fall asleep worrying about a call or a balance or a lie I'd have to tell myself to get through the day. I just let myself be still. The next morning, I opened my windows and played music while I cleaned, something upbeat, something from my 20s. I sang along, badly, but it made me laugh. I baked a lemon loaf, delivered half to my neighbor, Barbara, who'd lost her husband last winter. She smiled when she saw me. "You look different," she said. "Maybe I finally feel different," I replied. For the first time in decades, I was starting to imagine a life that wasn't just about giving. A life where I took up space, had plans, goals, peace. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't bitterness. It was reclamation. I wasn't trying to punish David. I wasn't even hoping he'd understand. I was just choosing myself. But peace doesn't always sit quietly, because when you stop playing your old role, someone always tries to drag you back into the script. The knock came at 8:42 p.m. Not a soft, uncertain tap, but 3 hard thuds, impatient and loud enough to make the picture frames rattle slightly on the hallway wall. I didn't have to look through the peephole to know it was him. David. I opened the door slowly. He stood on the porch in joggers, a hoodie, phone in one hand, annoyance plain on his face. Not fear, not apology, just irritation. "Why didn't you answer your phone?" he said immediately. "No emergency," I replied. I figured it could. "Wait," he scoffed. "Mom, seriously? What's going on? My rent's due, my card got declined, and I can't even pay my phone bill. I thought you were going to help until I got things settled." "I have helped," I said. My voice was calm. Too calm, probably. For years. He rolled his eyes and stepped inside without asking. "So, what? Now you're cutting me off? You don't even warn me? You just shut everything down like I'm some stranger?" I didn't say anything at first, just watched him as he paced, as if the kitchen was still his space to move through, to claim. "You changed all the banking stuff, didn't you?" he said, stopping. "Jesus, Mom, you've really let your therapist mess with your head." That was the first time I felt the burn behind my eyes. Not from guilt, from rage, quiet rage, the kind you earn after being blamed for someone else's comfort collapsing. "My therapist didn't do this," I said softly. "I did. For me. Because I deserve a life that isn't built around rescuing you." He blinked, stunned, like he hadn't expected me to speak that plainly. "But I'm your son," he said, "and I'm your mother, not your safety net." For the first time, the silence between us wasn't warm or protective, it was sharp. He exhaled, turned toward the door, then looked back. "So what? Now I'm just on my own?" "You always were," I said. "You just didn't want to believe." It. He didn't slam the door when he left. He just closed it like any other person walking out of someone else's home. The house felt different after that. Not empty, just real. Later that night, I sat down with a cup of tea and tried to read. But I couldn't focus. My phone buzzed. A message from my sister Jean. "Hey, David just called me. Said you're freezing him out. Everything okay?" And just like that, the ripple began. David had started his own version of the story. Calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in months. "Carol, he's your only son. You don't just give up on family. It's not like he's stealing. It's just money." They all meant well, but none of them had seen the late-night transfers, the overdraft fees, the years of emotional erosion. None of them had sat, alone on their birthday. And still, I found myself shrinking again. Second-guessing, replaying everything. Maybe I had been too harsh. Maybe I should have given him a warning. Maybe I was selfish for needing space. The guilt came in waves, sharp and sudden, until I heard it. A voicemail from David. I played it on speaker. His voice was low, casual. I could hear street noise in the gone background. "Yeah, she's losing it," he said. "Thinks cutting me off will magically fix everything. She's been reading self-help books or some crap. Swears she's having some awakening or whatever." A pause, then laughter. Not his, a woman's voice, young, high-pitched. "She really blocked the transfers?" "Yep," he replied. "All of them. I'm gonna have to get creative." They laughed again. My hands didn't shake. Not this time, I just pressed save. Then I sat back in my chair, staring out the window at the dark yard beyond the porch. This was no longer a misunderstanding, no longer a lost son looking for support. This was someone who had learned how to manipulate people into calling it love, and I had been the easiest target. I thought the worst was over. But the truth hadn't even finished speaking yet, and the next voice I'd hear would crack the story wide open. The voicemail echoed in my mind like a storm trapped in a glass jar. "I'm gonna have to get creative." He wasn't struggling. He was strategizing. And suddenly, everything clicked into place. The calculated charm, the well-timed apologies, the guilt-laced requests. This wasn't carelessness. It was craftsmanship. I sat at my desk, hands still and breath shallow, replaying the recording in a loop. Not because I needed to hear it again, but because part of me didn't want to forget the tone of his voice. How effortlessly he mocked me. How easy it was for him to make light of my heartbreak. But the most chilling part wasn't what he said. It was who he said it to. The voice in the background. His girlfriend, Emma. I'd met her once, briefly. She came with him to Christmas dinner the year before last. She'd worn a rust-colored sweater and complimented my cranberry pie. Quiet. Polite, I'd liked her. Even sent her a birthday card after David mentioned the date in passing. So when I realized she'd been laughing too, something in me fractured. I opened a drawer and pulled out an old envelope. Inside was a rent receipt from 7 months ago, the one I paid when David said Emma's job had fallen through and they were about to be evicted. I had paid $200 that day. Without question. Now here they were, ridiculing me like some naive woman too fragile to know better. I wanted to scream, not from pain, from clarity, but I didn't. Instead, I wrote a letter. Dear David, it wasn't long, just a page and a half. No anger, no accusations, just the truth. I told him I loved him, told him I always would, but I also told him something I should have said a long time ago. You don't get to treat people like banks and expect them to smile while they break. You don't get to use love as a debit card. I told him I wasn't angry, I was awake, and I was finished. I signed it. Mom. I sealed the envelope, drove to his apartment complex and slipped it into his mailbox. I didn't knock, didn't look around, just walked away. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel weak, I felt strong. Strong in the quiet way women become when they stop apologizing for wanting peace. That night, I made dinner for myself, set the table, put on soft music, 1 plate, 1 candle, 1 glass of wine. I ate slowly, deliberately, like someone learning how to enjoy their own company again. Then the doorbell rang. I froze. For a heartbeat, I thought it might be him. Maybe with anger, maybe with a plea, maybe with an apology he didn't believe. But when I opened the door, it wasn't David. It was Emma. She looked different, paler, eyes rimmed red like she'd been crying. Hi, she said, her voice barely, above a whisper. Can I talk to you? I stepped back, motioned her in. She sat on the edge of the couch, clutching a tote bag like it was armor. I heard the voicemail, she said. I wasn't supposed to, but he left it open on his laptop. And I heard it. I said nothing, just waited. I didn't know that's how he spoke to you, she continued. I didn't know how much you'd helped us. I thought he was the one supporting you, that you were unstable. I closed my eyes for a moment. Of course, that was the story he told her, that I was old, clingy, controlling. Emma looked at her lap. He told me he was giving you money every month, said you had memory problems. My breath caught in my chest. That's why I laughed in the voicemail, she said. I thought you were just dramatic, but you're not. You're kind, you helped us, and I let him lie about you. She started to cry then, small, crumpled sobs that seemed to surprise her as much as they did me. I handed her a tissue, said, nothing for a long time. Then finally, you're not the first person he fooled. She looked at me with wide, grateful eyes. I don't know what to do. And I said, calmly, evenly, leave if you can. Before you lose pieces of yourself, you won't know how to get back. She nodded, quietly. When she stood to go, she turned to me and said, thank you. For the truth. After she left, I stood at the window and watched her walk into the night, her bag clutched tightly in her arms. Not everyone gets out early. Some of us take decades. I thought that letter would be the last word. But then, on a rainy Thursday, I saw my name scrawled on an envelope in handwriting I knew like my own. It was Thursday afternoon. The sky hung heavy with rain, the kind that doesn't pour so much as it lingers, slow, gray, and persistent. I was folding laundry when I heard the soft thud of the mail slot. At first, I thought nothing of it. Just bills, maybe a flyer. But when I walked to the front door and saw the cream-colored envelope on the floor, I paused. It had my name on it, Mom, written in David's handwriting. I'd know those uneven, slanted letters anywhere. My fingers hovered over it for a moment. I half expected it to vanish if I blinked. I picked it up slowly, turned it over. No return address, no stamp. He must have delivered it by hand. I carried it to the kitchen table and sat down before opening it. The letter was short. I'm not ready to talk, but I'm thinking about everything. I know I hurt you. I hope one day I can be better. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know that. No apology, no explanations, but also no request, no manipulation, no ask for money, and that, in its own quiet way, felt like a step, not a mended bridge, just the first brick laid down, on his side this time. I folded the letter and slid it into the drawer beside my old journal, not out of sentimentality, but because I wanted to remember this moment, the moment he finally said nothing, and let that be enough. I didn't cry. I didn't rush to respond. I just made tea, wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, and watched the rain trace long fingers across the window pane. In the weeks that followed, the silence between us grew. But for once, it wasn't hollow. It was necessary, like soil lying fallow after a long, toxic harvest. David didn't call. Didn't reach out, and something about that felt right. I turned my attention inward. The library downtown was looking for volunteers to help with their community literacy program. I hadn't worked with children in years, but when I stepped into that building and smelled the old pages and floor wax, something opened up inside, me like a forgotten door. I started going every Wednesday afternoon. On Sundays, I walked in the park. On Mondays, I joined a gentle yoga class for women over 60. I wasn't very flexible, but I liked the quiet focus of it. I liked feeling my body again, for me, not just for survival. I even started a little ritual. One night a week, I'd cook myself a nice dinner, light a candle, and eat it at the dining room table with music playing, just like I used to when Mark was alive, not because I was pretending, but because I was remembering that I had always been a full person, with tastes, desires, dreams. I'd just spent too long shrinking those parts of myself to fit inside someone else's need. Friends began to notice the change. Jean stopped by one day and said, "You look 10 pounds lighter, not in body, in spirit." And she was right. It wasn't just the financial relief. It was the emotional return of something I didn't know I'd lost. Dignity, self-respect, peace. David's girlfriend, ex-girlfriend now, as I learned through mutual contacts, moved out a week after we spoke. She left him, blocked his number. Started a job in another city. I never heard from her again, but sometimes I think of her and hope she found her footing. As for David, I don't know what his life looks like now, and for once, I'm okay not knowing. He may come back one day, he may not, but I'm no longer waiting, because the truth is, I'm not angry anymore. I'm not wounded. I'm simply clear. I gave him life. I gave him love. But I was never meant to give him everything. That was my mistake, and I've forgiven myself for it. If you've ever had to walk away from someone you love to protect your peace, how did you find strength? I'd truly love to know. The rain eventually stopped that Thursday. The clouds parted like someone had gently peeled back the sky. I stood at my window, the letter still warm in the drawer behind me, and thought, not about what I'd lost, but about what I'd finally reclaimed. And as the light returned to my home, I realized something. The story wasn't about what he took from me. It was always about what I would finally choose to keep.